Thank you, Kartigan. A very well welcome to those who have just joined us. I am Yasmin Ahmad, a lead psychologist at the Singapore Prison Service, and I will be the facilitator for this session, which is on sexual offending. To our friends joining us from Singapore and other parts of the world, we are glad to have you with us today. Just a gentle reminder to all our colleagues and delegates with us on this session not to record or reproduce any content from the presentations. Nevertheless, for non-sensitive content, you are free to and encouraged to share your experiences and thoughts on our social media. Don't forget to hashtag ACOP 2022. Delegates can also find the recordings of the conference presentations on this platform after the day's proceedings. For this special session today, we have a total of 3 presentations. Each presentation will take about 15 minutes each. Our speakers are live with us today, and they will be taking questions from the audience in the combined 10-minute Q&A portion at the end of our special session. As you can see on the screen today, our presentation titles are listed there, and the first presentation is by Mr. Sean So and Mr. Marcus from Touch Community Services. The second presentation is by Mr. Kenny Ang and Mr. Bleston from Singapore Prison Service. And the final presentation is by Mr. Lim Tzu Hui from Central Police University. Again, I strongly encourage all attendees to post any questions that you have for our speakers today on the Q&A tab. Without further ado, it is my joy to introduce the first presentation for today's session. The first presentation is by Mr. Sean So and Mr. Marcus Lim from Touch Community Services. Mr. Sean is Head of Touch Youth Intervention from Touch Integrated Family Group. He has established his working expertise with youths, parents, and families to provide intervention for various issues, including cyber wellness. Mr. Marcus is a social worker with Touch Youth Intervention. He works on a variety of youth-related issues like adolescent mental health concerns and juvenile delinquency. But his bread and butter has been working with youths and their families on cyber-related crimes or cyber-related issues like gaming addiction, problematic pornography, and cyberbullying. Mr. Sean and Mr. Marcus's presentation today will focus on the issue of cyber addiction in the form of problematic pornography use and its potential connection to youth sexual offences. It will also cover their perspectives and response as a community social service agency through intervention and youth counselling. We will now start the presentation by Mr. Sean and Mr. Marcus, please.
Good afternoon, everyone. Really appreciate all of you for making time to attend this conference today. Please make yourself comfortable, get a drink, and enjoy the session. My name is Sean from Touch Community Services. I'm a counselor by training, and I lead the youth intervention team, which consists of social workers and counselors. Let me share my slides. Today, I will be touching on the topic of problematic pornography consumption, covering on what Touch as a community agency observe on the ground, and also how we provide support to address this particular type of cyber wellness issue. But before that, let me give a brief introduction about my organization. Touch Community Services is a non-profit charity organization in Singapore, and we have officially registered in 1992, and that is 30 years back, and we are celebrating our 30th anniversary this year. We are also a member of the National Council of Social Service since 1994. In the work that we do, we have impacted the lives of 200,000 people. Touch 22 services are spread through 6 service groups: children, youth, family, special needs, healthcare, and elderly. The topic of my sharing today is about cyber wellness. We have been working to promote cyber wellness, healthy gaming, and online safety, and also reaching out to 360 schools and more than 1.6 million youths, parents, educators, and counselors. In addition, we also specialize in counseling and intervention, focusing on cyber wellness and mental health. Okay, and in this slide, okay, zooming into the area of cyber wellness, these are some of the milestones that we have achieved over the years. Of course, our engagement with the ministry started way back in 2004 to craft out the National Cyber Wellness Framework and also other ministries to train and share with other professionals on various cyber wellness issues. This is the framework that our organization adopts. The three pillars supported by R&D. Okay, we always believe in research and development, and we always believe in educating the community so that they are able to make informed decisions. We also have centers to better support and engage the various groups of clients, including elderly, children, and youths. As for today's sharing, I'll be focusing on how Touch provides counseling in relation to the topic of pornography. And the evidence of sexual behavioral issues is all around us. Here are some behavioral issues that we have observed over the years, and also highlighting how these behaviors manifest in different forms. These are just some examples of the many referrals that we receive for this profile of clients, but how their behaviors are related to pornography consumption really depends on the individual, because each individual is unique. We do receive such cases for children, youth, and also adults. But the clients that come to us are mostly children and youths because they are brought in by the school or by their parents. Okay, and here are some stats that we have. Our counselors and social workers are running 2 helplines. And these are some stats about help seeking. And for the past 3 years, as you can see, we have received almost 3,500 inquiries via our 2 helplines. 1,031 of them are related to cyber issues involving addiction or excessive device use. We also look at the number of calls under the category of mental wellness. That is also 1,187, which is quite similar to the number of calls related to cyber wellness. And the rest of the calls, which you can see here in the pink part of the pie chart, okay, we have about 1,245 calls. These are calls outside of cyber wellness and mental wellness calls, which includes youth at risk, family issues, relationship issues, yeah, and so on. Okay, so yeah, these are just some stats to kind of share with all of you to help you understand the behavior of help seeking in the local context. Okay, and when it comes to intervention, our efforts and programs are not possible without our key stakeholders. We believe in a holistic approach where each of these parties can effectively support these clients in various areas. So we look at the peers within the school community. We also work with parents to kind of fine-tune with them the home environment so that it can be conducive enough to support their children. We also work with educators and counselors on how to better support the clients, whether they need buddies in school to kind of mentor or guide them. Oh, and we also work with corporate partners who are keen to volunteer in any part of the intervention. And lastly, we also work with community agencies who are involved in one way or another in another area of the client's life. Okay, and in our work with our clients, these are the key components that build the intervention model for our programs. So we are looking at counseling, group work, case conference, and parenting sessions. So for counseling, we actually counsel the individual we need to get the buy-in of the individual. Why is this valuable for me? Yeah. So when we help the client to understand how counseling can help them, they will be able to commit and be motivated to participate during counseling. And with that, we also need to identify their needs. When we identify their needs, we will try and collaborate and work with them to form new habits, new and healthy habits to kind of fulfill those needs. When it comes to group work, we look at peer learning, okay, and self-discovery, whereby they'll be given reflective questions to kind of understand in their own lives what are some of the lessons learned, how have they been coping with the problems that they have been experiencing, and also hearing from the peers within the group how they are coping with their issues as well. And for case conference, definitely, as mentioned earlier in the earlier slide, we work very closely with other stakeholders so that we can form a holistic intervention plan for our clients. And parenting sessions definitely very important because we want to build the family resources, as the family unit actually is one of the key and strong factors to help the client to make progress and create positive change, because they spend most of their time at home. So now we look at the case of Jack. Okay, the case of Jack is one of the clients that we see in Touch Youth Intervention. Okay, so Jack is 15 years old and he was referred by his school to us for counseling. And the main reason for that was because he was watching pornography openly in class. And the school later found out from Jack that he also approached one of his sister's female friends if he could pay her to allow him to touch her private part. So this is something that we rarely come across. And when the school know about this, they were quite shocked and they decided to refer Jack to us. So during his counseling with us, Jack shared that he often hangs out with his group of friends, okay, in his neighborhood, and he often plays soccer with them because Jack likes soccer. And very frequently, they'll have sexual conversations which they laugh and joke about. And eventually, Jack went online to search for materials about what his friends were talking about because he was curious. Yeah, just because he was curious. So how did Jack resolve his issues when he decided to start counseling with us? These are the 4 aspects that we touch on. And the first one, we talk about the dangers of pornography. Definitely, this is something that not a lot of children, youth, or even adults know about the dangers. Whether is it how it affects the brain or how it affects your perspective of the opposite sex. So these are some of the, I would say, in-depth conversation that we have with our clients. And some of them actually did share that, oh, I have not heard about this before. It is something very beneficial for me. So this is one part of the intervention, counseling part with the clients. And we also work with parents because Jack's mother is a single mother. So definitely she will need to spend a lot of time working to bring home the income for the family. And that limits the amount of time she can spend with Jack. So that is another thing that we touch on with Jack's mother, touching on the key factor of supervision. Okay, how can she supervise Jack rather than let him hang out with his friends so often after school, because there's nothing for Jack to look forward to at home. So these are some of the questions that we ask the mom. How can she better support Jack even though she's working? Okay, and in terms of school, we also work with the school very closely, as mentioned earlier. We try to increase the number of protective factors and also to help the child to be motivated to go to school. Lastly, we'll also talk about coping strategies. Okay, equipping Jack with strategies to fight off temptations. And this is not something that is easy to accomplish. So definitely, this is one of the components that will take a longer time. And lastly, we also look at the motivation towards desired outcomes. Jack definitely will need to identify some of his personal goals, and that would create more drive to work towards his goals during counseling. Because if there are no goals, then there is really no purpose or value in continuing counseling. Okay. Yeah. And if you know of anyone who will benefit from our services, please feel free to contact us, give them their number, and ask them to call us via our helpline during the operating hours as shown, excluding public holidays, or they can also drop us an email. And with that, I will end my presentation here. Thank you.
We thank Mr. Sean and Mr. Marcus for the insightful presentation. I believe many in the audience have benefited from your sharing, particularly on the multi-systemic approach to managing problematic pornography use among youths. And this includes working with schools, parents, and community agencies. The next presentation we have is by Mr. Kenny Ang and Mr. Bleston Low from Singapore Prison Service. Mr. Kenny and Mr. Bleston are both psychologists from the Singapore Prison Service, and they work very closely with inmates convicted of sexual offences. They are involved in conducting assessments, intervention, design and evaluation of programs for sexual offenders, and they also partake in research endeavours with this population. Their presentation considers contributing factors of youth sexual offending and motivations that may be linked to the commission of sexual violence, with an added focus on technology-facilitated sexual violence. The presentation will also reflect on the possible contribution of protective factors to reduce the likelihood of future sexual reoffending. Without further ado, we will begin the presentation by Mr. Kenny and Mr. Bleston, please.
Good afternoon, everyone. I'm Kenny, and with me today is Bleston. We are both psychologists with the Singapore Prison Service, and we work with adults and youth convicted of sexual offences. For today, the focus of the presentation will be on youths, and specifically, we will be sharing with you on the socio-ecological perspective and role of technology for male youths who sexually offended. This presentation was scoped to allow us to be more informed of characteristics and possible factors contributing to the commission and desistance of sexual offences by youths, and for us to consider using this information to develop more informed management strategies for them. A sexual offence is defined as an offence which involves actual, attempted, or threatened sexual contact with a person who is non-consenting or unable to give consent. These acts may also result in physical or psychological harm to the person, and in recent years, there was an increase in arrests for the number of youths who committed outrage of modesty and rape offences between 2016 to 2020. It was also observed that there was an increase in the number of technology-facilitated sexual violence cases. Based on our clinical observations, we also see youths entering the criminal justice system for such offences. With this increase in offences, it can be seen as a public health issue as it impacts individuals and communities. Hence, it's imperative that researchers, treatment providers, law and policy makers, as well as other stakeholders come together to reduce sexual offending and identify upstream prevention efforts. Youths who sexually offended are a heterogeneous population, and they differ on several characteristics. Firstly, the various relationships that a youth can have with his victim could include the youth being someone from within the victim's family, such as the victim's brother. Secondly, the victims of sexual offences can vary by their age, developmental stage, and can be either male or female. Thirdly, the degree of sexual contact could range from those with physical contact, such as molest, to virtual or tech-facilitated contact, such as voyeurism. Next, studies have found that some youths who commit sexual offences were also found to have committed other general offences such as violence or substance abuse. Those who committed both sexual and non-sexual offences are classified as generalists, while those who only commit sexual offences are classified as specialists. Lastly, youths who sexually offend could also be more impulsive or has poor social skills where they might face difficulties establishing and maintaining connections with their peers or intimate partners. People sexually offend for a wide variety of reasons and as a result of many different influences on the youth psychology. The socio-ecological model provides a framework for understanding the different influences and their relationships to one another. By understanding how these different factors interplay, it will allow us to better design and propose strategies for better treatment outcomes. In the first sphere of the model, it includes factors such as an individual's personal history, which includes demographic factors, mental disorders, history of past offending, as well as attitudes and beliefs which could serve to lower or increase the likelihood of sexual offending. In the second sphere of the model are relationship factors which include the closest relationships in an individual's life, such as family, friends, and intimate partners. Factors include childhood maladjustments, social isolation, as well as peer influence or pressure. Community factors lies in the third sphere and it looks at the characteristics of environments such as schools, workplaces, or neighborhoods that can increase the likelihood of youth sexual offending. Lastly, societal factors are macro-level factors such as societal norms, cultures, laws, and policies. Now, I'll be sharing a list of risk and protective factors in the various spheres in the youth ecology. However, do note that the list is non-exhaustive. Under individual risk factors, an example would be sexualized coping, where youths use sexual behaviors as their main coping strategy during periods of stress or dysfunction, and these are usually inappropriate, costly, or has a high probability of negative consequences. Under relationships, an example would be negative role modeling. As peer groups are the most important socializing influence on youth behavior and values, youth may model after antisocial influences as they tend to overestimate their peers' acceptance of problem behaviors. Next, an example from macro-level factors would be traditional gender and sexual scripts, where men are expected to be aggressive and dominant, while females focus on characteristics such as passivity and physical attractiveness. With men's belief that all physical contact should lead to sex and women believing that they should give in to men when men request for sex, it could lead to negative or hostile beliefs about women, which may impair how men form warm, close, and egalitarian relationships with women. Next, I'll be sharing on the protective factors, which are variables or characteristics that lower the probability of negative behaviors and offending. On the individual level, youths who sexually offended could undergo treatment to learn skills to help them manage sexual urges or impulses healthily. An example of relationship factors will be for youths to interact with pro-social peers and be exposed to pro-social norms to aid their development of healthier attitudes that are against committing inappropriate sexual behaviors. On the community and societal level, it's also likely that when youths are provided with timely interventions to address problematic sexual behaviors and comprehensive sexual education which addresses issues such as consent, coercion, and false beliefs regarding sex, it inculcates a positive climate where healthy sexual behaviors are encouraged. It is important to note that no single risk or protective factors best predict sexual reoffending or desistance respectively. Various factors exist in the youth ecology, and we must consider how these various factors interplay to help inform strategies for preventive and rehabilitative efforts. I will now pass the time to Bleston to share more on TFSV and myths regarding youths who are sexually offended.
Thank you, Kenny, for the succinct overview of youth sexual offending. As mentioned, one of the possible reasons in the rise of sexual offences among youths could be due to a new form of sexual offending, TFSV, which is a range of sexually aggressive and harassing behaviors that are perpetrated with technology. These behaviors include image-based sexual abuse, which is the non-consensual taking, sharing, or threatening to share sexual content of a person. Voyeurism, which can include upskirting and recording when others are undressing. Sending unsolicited sexual images, such as the non-consensual sexting or sending of genitalia pictures to others. Lastly, We also have the use of technology such as dating apps like Tinder to facilitate physical meetups and to commit sexual violence. With technology, it was found that youths have access to technological devices as young as 8. With the reliance on technology and a lack of parental control, users may lack awareness of personal safety and knowledge of their privacy and security, which might lead to oversharing of information. Whether is it the increased anonymity or the increased ease of access and storage to deviant materials, it is evident to see its integral role in facilitating TFSV. Anonymity allows one to have fantasy and experiment with forbidden behavior without the fear of public stigmatization. Deviant materials are also simply a click away. Furthermore, technology can also serve as a breeding ground for youths with deviant sexual interests to easily find like-minded peers. This has contributed to the proliferation of sex forums and obscene chat groups, such as SG Nasi Lemak Group. Users may also accidentally be exposed to such inappropriate content in these deviant subcultures. Unhealthy sexual behaviors can be perpetrated since members can easily engage in sexual experimentation and conversation with one another. This is different from the past, when it would be hard to find people of similar deviant interests in a physical context, given the deterrence from social undesirability and physical constraints. But even with technology, why will one want to commit TFSV still? A few potential motivations, which are non-exhaustive, can be seen at the following points. Sexual gratification, or simply to gain sexual pleasure. Monetary gain, which includes the use of intimate photos to blackmail for money, or even having an exclusive deviant community that one has to pay to get in. Social status building. Members demonstrate their capability when they share intimate photos or videos in a sex forum. Desire for power and control. Individuals may resort to TFSV to compensate for negative feelings and low self-esteem. Another area that we want to delve into is related to the few possible misconceptions that people may have of youth sexual offenders. Firstly, is it true that youth sexual offenders are like adult sexual offenders? If so, should they then be treated similarly? Certainly not. Youths go through a developmental stage that is marked by profound changes, so we have to take that into consideration when comparing youths and adults. For instance, dopaminergic activity, which is critical to the brain's reward system, is the highest during early adolescence, which can result in higher sensation seeking among youths than that of adults. Developmentally, youths are also less likely to consider the consequences and impact of their actions. Secondly, across the adolescent stage, the development of sexual interest and orientation is dynamic, and youths will thus naturally be curious about their sexuality and related topics. This can lead to some youths to commit an offense opportunistically as compared to planning out the offenses. As youths get older, peer influence takes a more central stage in their lives, as they spend less time with their parents. Under peer influence, studies have also shown the increased susceptibility of youths in engaging in impulsive and risk-taking behavior under peer pressure. Next, are youth sexual offenders different from other youth offenders who commit non-sexual offenses? This is untrue. Both groups of youths can share similar risk factors such as behavioral maladjustment and antisocial attitudes. Notably, it is important to differentiate youths who commit sexual and other types of offenses, also known as generalists, and youths who commit only sexual offenses, also known as specialists. As mentioned by Kenny earlier, the former present with higher levels of criminogenic needs with different sexual risk factors than specialists. Given that they are criminally diverse youths who sexually offended, studies have suggested the possible influence of such general criminogenic risk and needs on sexual offending. On the other hand, specialists require targeted treatment on managing deviant sexual interest and sexual self-regulation. Lastly, is it true that treatment for youth sexual offenders are ineffective? Certainly not. Studies have shown the effectiveness of treatment, especially ones that involve multisystemic and cognitive behavioral approaches, in reducing the recidivism rate of youth sexual offenders. Compared with adults, the sexual recidivism rate of youth offenders is generally lower, given the motivation behind youth sexual offending can be experimental or to compensate for deficits in social skills and self-worth at the developmental phase. However, as one grows from adolescence to young adulthood, brain maturation will occur, and the propensity for sexual exploration will likely decrease, which may explain why more youth sexual offenders cease from offending by early adulthood. This is not to say that there isn't a group of youth sexual offenders who might still persist into sexual offending, such as specialists with more deviant sexual attachment. With this, I will now pass the time to Kenny to elaborate on the clinical significance of the points that we have discussed thus far.
It can be seen that no single factor is responsible for explaining why an individual may sexually offend. Therefore, all stakeholders in the youth system must contribute to help youth develop a healthy lifestyle free from sexual offending. For instance, while the youth is incarcerated, rehabilitation program can be delivered and case conferences can be held to inform relevant stakeholders of progress and risk factors that needs to be addressed. All youth and families have individual strengths that can be identified, built on and employed to prevent future risks of sexual reoffending. Therefore, the use of a strengths-based approach to emphasize positive goal attainment rather than eliminating deficits or problem behaviors could prove to be more attractive and engaging to youth. Individually tailored intervention plans must also be reviewed and adjusted periodically based on the youth's progress and must entail a comprehensive relapse prevention plan detailing important aspects of a youth offending cycle. Additionally, studies have emphasized the importance of supervision and monitoring to ensure that youth's time are structured and occupied by pro-social activities to reduce their chances of reoffending. Firstly, supervision involves the imposition of controls aimed to enhance the youth's lifestyle through structure, boundaries, and expectations. Through supervision, it allows intensive support to be provided to youth in managing the negative influence of risk factors and promote the effectiveness of protective factors. An example would be to set specific conditions in using technological devices such as limiting the use to education and communication purposes, with parental controls or website blocking applications installed to prevent access to undesirable websites or applications. Secondly, monitoring requires stakeholders to be aware of youth's whereabouts, activities, and how they are adapting to their environment. Monitoring is less intrusive as it focuses more on surveillance and check-ins rather than imposing control or restrictions. The purpose of monitoring is to allow early detection of risky behaviors and serves to evaluate changes in risk over time to ensure that management strategies are revised appropriately. An example would be for parents and caregivers to actively check in with youth to ensure that they are not engaging in risky sexual behaviors. Youth can be asked to complete a behavioral and thoughts monitoring diary to determine if they are experiencing an increase in sexual thoughts, urges, or masturbation which could lead to risky sexual behaviors. With this, we have come to the end of our sharing, and to summarize, we explored the characteristics of youth who sexually offended, looked into the possible factors that can lead to the increase or decrease in the likelihood of the commission of a sexual offense, and touched on some treatment considerations as well as management strategies that we can try out in our work with youth who have sexually offended. We hope that you have found it to be helpful to your work, and do reach out to us if you have any further questions. Thank you.
We thank Mr. Kenny and Mr. Blaston for the engaging presentation. Their presentation has certainly shed light on the multiple spheres of influence on an individual's offending behavior and how they became considered for intervention and monitoring or even supervision purposes. The next presentation we have is by Mr. Lin Chi Hui from Central Police University. Mr. Lin is pursuing his PhD studies at the Central Police University. During his studies, he has tried to explore the changes and combinations from the applications of criminal profiling on practical investigation. His presentation will take us through how his study used the Bayesian network model to predict sexual offenders' characteristics such as age, level of education, marital status, and previous convictions. Without further ado, we will begin the presentation by Mr. Lin. Please.
Good morning, everyone. I'm Zhehui Lin. I'm a PhD student at the Central Police University in Taiwan. I'm honored to have this opportunity to give a short presentation on my research. My topic is the prediction of offender characteristics in stranger sexual assaults by the Bayesian network model. This is my presentation overview. Introduction. With the improvement of criminal investigation knowledge of offenders, it's hard to find evidence such as DNA or fingerprint at crime scenes, but maybe we can use behavior evidence, crime scene evidence, and victim characteristics to predict the offender and to narrow the scope of investigation. These are 4 basic assumptions of crime profiling. 1 is modus operandi. 2. Personality traits. 3. Signature. 4. Crime scene reflects offenders' personality traits. This slide shows 2 theories of criminal behavior to link criminal characteristics. 1. Behavior consistency assumption. The offender will make similar behavior between different crime scenes. 2. Homology assumption. In a specific type of crime, 2 offenders will have similar criminal characteristics. This slide shows research and application of crime profiling in sexual assault cases. Those research classified offenders of sexual assault into several types of offenders. Then, let me introduce the Bayesian theory. Conditional probability PAB describes the probability of event A when event B occurs. It uses a priori probability to infer the probability of an unknown event A. If viewed from a reverse aspect, when event A is determined to have occurred, the probability of occurrence of B, P, Bi is the inverse derivation of the conditional probability, and its formula is as follows. Then, let me introduce Bayesian network. Bayesian network is a probabilistic graph model that can combine uncertainty in a specific field into a model. Bayesian network is composed of directed acyclic graph and some directional parameter structures, which are composed of conditional probability tables. They represent the joint probability distribution of database. This is my research structure and process. This research constructed a Bayesian network model from the database of Criminal Police Bureau in Taiwan, and then we collected cases to check the accuracy. This slide we can see 250 cases of sexual assaults by strangers was collected by the Criminal Police Bureau in Taipei Prison and Kaohsiung Prison. 174 of them can be analyzed. We used the data to construct the Bayesian network model, and then we collected 75 cases of sexual assaults by strangers in Taichung Prison and Yilan Prison to test the accuracy. Those are variables in my research. This slide shows the whole Bayesian network model of stranger sexual assaults. Next, I will choose the characteristics of offenders for discussion. This slide shows the prediction model of offenders educational level. Those are Bayesian network diagram and conditional probability table. From them, we can see if it is determined that there is no use of deception in the case, the probability of the offender's educational level is below junior high school is 65%. Offender who used deception was more educated. Among the 75 cases, there are 33 cases involving the use of deception, among which 22 cases have the educational level of the offender above high school, so the accuracy is 66%. Among the 75 cases, 42 cases did not use deception, of which 29 cases were the offender whose educational level was lower than junior high school. The accuracy is 69%. This slide shows the prediction model of marital status and age of offenders. In case where offenders took items from a crime scene, the probability that the offender was under the age of 13 was 59%. Although the accuracy of predicting the offender was married is high, when using the variable, the offender was under 13 years old. But because the two nodes were the variables to be predicted in this study, it had no function to predict. Among the 75 cases, there are 23 cases where items were taken away from the scene, among which 13 cases were the offenders under the age of 13. The age of 30. Therefore, the accuracy to predict the age of the offender was 56%. Among the 75 cases, there were 52 cases in which items were not taken away from the scene, and 31 cases were in which the offender was over 13 years old. Therefore, the accuracy to predict that the offender was over 13 years old was 59%. This slide shows a model for predicting offenders' criminal record. The analysis of Bayesian network. If it was determined that the victim was physically or mentally handicapped, the probability of the offender had a criminal record is 30%. If it was determined that the victim had no physical or mental disabilities, the probability of the offender had no previous criminal record is 65%. Among the 75 cases, there are 9 cases in which the victim is a mentally handicapped person, and 2 cases have no criminal records. Therefore, the accuracy to predict the offender with no criminal record is 22%. It can be found that the accuracy of predicting that the offender should have no previous criminal record is extremely low. When determining the victim is mentally handicapped, which may be partly due to the small number of the sample, only 9 of 75 cases are persons with disabilities caused by underrepresentation. Among the 75 cases, there were 66 cases where the victim was not physically or mentally handicapped, and 58 of them had a criminal record. Therefore, the accuracy to predict the offenders should have a criminal record is 87%. And here is my conclusion and recommendations. 1. This study doesn't focus on the accuracy of prediction, but on constructing a Bayesian network model of the overall variable probability and using its advantages to provide suggestions and directions of investigation. 2. This research has many limitations. One is the difficulty in obtaining data. 2. And the variable design should need more research. 3. The practical benefits. Here's my recommendations. 1. The definition and design of variables should need more research. 2. We should seeking for other characteristics to predict the offender. 3. We should establishment and application of dynamic database that can help we to get the database to predict the offender. That's all my presentation. Thank you for your time.
We thank Mr. Lin for the very thought-provoking presentation. I believe many in the audience would have benefited from your sharing on the use of the Bayesian model to assist with criminal profiling. I certainly did. It was quite new to me. The sharing of the different types of offenses and the offender variables associated with them was very insightful. We will now be moving on to the live Q&A segment for the remaining duration of the session. We would like to invite the presenters, our wonderful presenters, into the virtual space for the Q&A segment. So we have a few questions, and I would perhaps like to start the ball rolling with this particular question that is directed for Touch Community Services. So what are the challenges of the multi-systemic approach that you mentioned, and how can we overcome them?
Hi, Yasmin. Thanks for the question. Yeah, Marcus here from Touch Community Services. I'm a social worker there, and I'm a colleague to Sean So gave the talk earlier. Yeah, so the multi-systemic approach, as Sean alluded to earlier, it's essentially involving the different systems in the picture. So the youth, the parents, the school, maybe the family service center if they're involved as well, in the intervention and the care, which obviously has been quite a helpful approach for us. But yes, as Yasmin pointed out, it comes with its challenges, namely some or even very fundamentally, getting the stakeholders together, engaging them in itself is really quite a challenge. I should point out again that, yeah, we're coming in as a community agency, ultimately a community responders to this issue. And what we then might lack in this dynamic is, authority or jurisdiction to mandate people's attending, and stuff like that. So unlike some governmental agencies, and that can be very, very challenging. For example, even just getting the youth to agree to our sessions, at its worst, it could look, beyond the youth, maybe even the parents as well, at its worst, it could look like a lot of defaulted sessions or no shows or very hard to engage them. At its best, it looks like a long run of building rapport with the client, and that can be a very lengthy process, and that means it can be quite a taxing role for community counselors as well. So that is one massive challenge. Another one is also, given that we're trying to engage as many stakeholders to come in on this issue, being on the same page can be challenging. Yeah, and for this, I might allude to a point that I think Kenny and Blesson brought up earlier in their sharing, that we we have to look at youth offenders with a slightly different lens than adults because of just the developmental stage, and we very much incorporate this in what we hope to do. But that can be very challenging when different stakeholders we don't have the same idea, and they might want to come in with a more heavy-handed approach, or they might be they might already have a particular idea of how they want to manage the youth or the issue. And those are some of the main challenges that come to mind lah. How we might overcome them is I think platforms like this are awesome for that. Like just having people to come aboard and just hearing the different perspective would just it's public education in a sense, and it really would help to get more people on a similar page of how we want to approach this issue. Like I'll be curious, I was just looking at the numbers, out of the 400 plus people, which is an amazing turnout, how many people would also be representing the community side of things. And I would love for more of my friends from the community services side to be able to be represented here as well, so that we can all in this space better how we can be supporting the youths. And I say that because if we look at the landscape, we tend to have a lot of services that fall on the further end of the spectrum, either those that are very preventive and very early, and that's great, very educational, or those that maybe on the other end of the spectrum, which is very downstream, where something has occurred, and then we need to come in with some consequences. And I think where Sean and I are coming from, where Touch is coming from, we're looking at the middle, space in the middle, what we can do with early signs of risk, what can we do there? And I think for that to work, we need more resources, we need more community partners, funding, manpower, more community counselors and social workers, stuff like that. So those are some things that might help, I hope.
Thank you, Mr. Marcus. I think you said that so eloquently. I think your first point on the buy-in from the clients themselves is something that, you guys have so much perseverance in working with that and joining with them. The second point you raised was on really collaboration from different parties and being on the same page. And like you said, a shout out to all your comm partners who are here as well, right? Using this platform and learning from it. I also want to throw the same question to the colleagues from SPS as well, because while Touch works with one spectrum, SPS also mentioned this in their presentation. So I'm curious, Mr. Bleston or Mr. Kenny, your thoughts?
I would say that, thank you, Yasmin. For this, I think I would want to touch on the emphasis on it being a multi-systemic kind of thing, where we have to look at the youth being a part of many different spheres of influence and things like that affects their sexual offending. And I want to bring to our attention about this point that Mr. Sean brought up earlier on, for the family not taking the lead, right? Because I think we have to understand that for our youth and from our practice, we have seen that the family support is very important. And when we talk about supervision and monitoring, the caregivers, they are the first line to ensure that the youth are equipped with necessary skills. They are being monitored to be mindful of any unhealthy activities. And other than that, we are looking, if we look at it from a correctional setting, I would say that even the family members can be brought in at an earlier time. So this can be through case conferences that we are currently doing right now, where we share some of the protective factors, some of the risk factors with them, so that they know what to look out for when the youths are being have served their reformative training and then they are back in the community. These are some of the things that we can think of. This main point down the family.
Thanks, Mr. Kenny. Mr. Bleston, do you have anything to add on? Or
I think from our clinical observation of the cases, we are already seeing glimpses of that multi-systemic approach that we are seeing, whereby in terms of we need to examine what are the interventions that the youth has already gone through before coming into the reformative training center as well. And even after the end of the intervention itself, we also have to work closely with the other stakeholders, especially when the youths are released from the Reformative Training Center. We also have to be in that constant communication with the other stakeholders to not only update the other stakeholders of the progress of the intervention, but to also talk about or address some of the needs that the youths would still have, especially when they're released into the community, where there may be more destabilizers that will be present in the community that the youths and the family, the parents, the school should be mindful of. So I think having this kind of multi-systemic approach is very important to address the whole issue comprehensively, to have a holistic approach. Yeah, thank you.
Right. Thank you. And you really mentioned about getting people, getting the family involved much earlier, and also doing the transitioning a bit more smoother with them as well. And thank you for that. So there's actually a question that came in. I think this is for Mr. Lin. Mr. Lin, sorry, there's a new question for you. In the Bayesian network model, the question is this: in the Bayesian network model, were there difficulties in interpreting or learning the directionality of the interaction among the variables?
Okay, because the variable is difficult to obtain in some other previous research. So, and the information of the sexual assault is hard to obtain because it was for the privacy. So every variable allowable to record it in a prison. So it may be need more allowance. So the most difficult thing to get the data is to because of the privacy. So I think it's the most difficult things in this research.
Thank you, Mr. Lin, for taking that question very gung-ho. And I have more questions here, but unfortunately, I'm looking at the time and we're running quite low on time. So I think I would like to end at this juncture. If any of the audience members have questions for our presenters, do feel free to reach out to them. The slides will be uploaded on the conference platform. You can also get their contacts and then you can reach out to them. I would like to thank everyone, especially our presenters, for coming down today and answering the questions. Before we leave this session, there's some announcements that I have to make regarding the intermission. So at this point, we'll be having a 2-hour break. We will resume promptly at 8 p.m. Singapore time. So this is also a good time for our audience to go and check out the very interesting range of asynchronous posters and paper presentations that we have for you. So these posters and presentations are actually accessible on the sidebar throughout the entire conference. So we'll be presenting an award to the top 5 favorite posters on the last day. So do remember to vote for your favorite posters. The online voting will actually close at 12 noon Singapore time on 21st July, which is this Thursday. So the 5 winning posters will be announced at the closing ceremony. At the same time, please enjoy the videos that the conference organizing committee has come up with. There's lots of videos there for you to view. After the break, we will have a keynote address. For today, the keynote address will be by Dr. Cassandra Cross. So we seek your understanding to rejoin us back on the platform slightly earlier, like 10 to 15 minutes before the keynote presentation. And I would like to thank everyone for your attention, and I wish you have a great break. Thank you.